Why would a dying cowboy tell Hannah Whitcomb not to fear him, before she discovered the one mark her father had taught her never to forgive? Blood streaked the wet fence rail. Bishop stamped in the grass as Hannah dropped beside the wounded man, cold mud soaking through her skirt. His eyes opened. "Don't be afraid of me." Then she saw the black hawk burned into his saddle above a broken star, and her hand froze. "What would you have done? Tell me below." The first thing Hannah Whitcomb saw was the blood. Not much, just a dark smear across the top rail of the east fence, still wet where somebody's hand had dragged over the weathered pine. Hannah pulled Juniper to a stop. The mare lifted her head, ears pointing toward Willow Creek. Dawn had not fully reached the Wyoming sky. Gray light lay across the soaked grass, and the storm that had battered the Whitcomb spread through most of the night was moving east in a wall of bruised clouds. Fence posts leaned where the creek had softened the ground. Cottonwood leaves glittered with rain. Hannah had ridden out before breakfast to see what the weather had damaged. She had expected broken wire, maybe a washed-out crossing. Not blood. She slid the small rifle from beside her saddle and listened. At first there was only water moving over stones. Then a horse nickered. Soft, uneasy. Hannah guided Juniper through the flattened grass. She saw the dark bay first. A handsome gelding stood near the creek with his reins hanging loose and his saddle crooked. Mud streaked his legs almost to the knees. He watched Hannah approach, then turned his head toward something hidden below the bank. A man. Hannah's hand tightened around the rifle. The stranger lay on his side in the wet grass, one arm trapped beneath him. His brown coat had torn across the shoulder. Blood had dried from a cut above his eyebrow, and mud covered half his face. His hat rested several feet away. He wasn't moving. Hannah dismounted, but kept Juniper's reins looped over her wrist. "Sir?" "Nothing." She stepped closer. "Can you hear me, still?" "Nothing." She knelt. His breathing was shallow but steady. When Hannah touched 2 fingers to his neck, she felt heat beneath cold skin. Fever. His right shoulder looked wrong, too. Not broken, she hoped, but swollen badly enough that moving him would be difficult. Hannah glanced toward the road. Briar Gulch was nearly an hour away at a hard ride. Her father was south trading cattle and would not return for weeks. The hired men had moved most of the herd to winter pasture 2 days earlier. There was nobody coming. The stranger's eyelids suddenly opened. Hannah jerked back. Dark green eyes found the rifle first, then her face. His hand lay inches from his revolver, but he didn't reach for it. Instead, his lips moved. "Don't." Hannah leaned closer despite herself. "Don't be afraid of me." His eyes closed again. For several seconds, Hannah remained exactly where she was. It was a strange thing for a wounded man to say. Stranger still because fear had not entered her mind until he named it. The bay horse stepped toward them and nudged the man's boot. "Easy," Hannah murmured. She approached the gelding slowly and caught his reins. He allowed it without resistance. "You're the sensible one, aren't you?" Hannah checked the saddle, looking for some clue to what had happened. One stirrup leather had twisted. The skirt was soaked. There was mud along the cantle. Then she saw the mark burned into the fender. A black hawk. Beneath it, a broken star. Hannah stopped breathing. Her fingers came away from the leather. Every child raised around Briar Gulch knew the brands of the larger outfits. Hannah knew this one better than most. Maddox. For 17 years, that name had not been spoken in beside the Whitcomb house unless there was no avoiding it. She saw her mother's portrait above the parlor mantel. Rose Whitcomb. 29 years old, forever. Beneath the portrait sat a small brass oil lamp, one side blackened by fire. Clay Whitcomb kept it polished, but never lit it. Hannah had been 7 when the Whitcomb barn burned. 7 when men carried her mother out beneath a blanket. 7 when her father stopped laughing for nearly a year. The details Hannah remembered came in pieces. Smoke against a night sky. Somebody holding her while she screamed for her mother. Clay on his knees afterward, his shirt black with soot. And one name repeated through everything. Levi Maddox, her father's enemy over Willow Creek water rights. The man Clay believed responsible for the quarrel that ended with Rose dead. Hannah looked toward the stranger. He was too young to be Levi, near 30 perhaps, but he rode beneath the Maddox mark. The bay nudged Hannah's shoulder and gave another low nicker. The stranger groaned. Hannah stared at him. She could ride to Briar Gulch. She could leave him here and bring help. By the time she returned, he might be dead. Her father's voice came back to her from years of working cattle beside him. Start with what can be proved. Not what fear says, not what anger remembers. What can be proved. Hannah looked at the man again. He was hurt. She was here. That was all she could prove. "Papa is going to call this foolish," she whispered. Then she laid the rifle aside. It took nearly half an hour to get the stranger across Juniper without putting weight on his injured shoulder. Twice his boots slipped, and Hannah nearly went down beneath him. By the time she managed it, mud covered her skirt, and her palms were raw. She led Juniper with one hand and the bay with the other. Not toward the house. That was a line she was not ready to cross. The old Whitcomb line cabin stood among cottonwoods a quarter-mile north of Willow Creek. Nobody had used it since spring. Inside were a narrow cot, an iron stove, a table, 2 chairs, a water barrel, and enough dust to prove company had not been expected. Hannah got a fire going. She cleaned the stranger's brow with boiled water and tore linen from an old flour sack for bandages. When she eased his injured arm into a better position, his face tightened. "Easy," she whispered. His eyes remained closed. By evening, the fever climbed. Hannah should have gone home. Instead, she filled the stove and stayed. Rain began again after dark, tapping first against the roof and then hammering hard enough to drown Willow Creek. The stranger shook beneath both blankets. Hannah changed the wet cloth at his neck. Once, near midnight, he spoke, "Ruth." Hannah looked up. His eyes were closed. Ruth. The second time the name broke in his throat. Not fear. Grief. Hannah sounded back slowly. Outside, the bay stood beneath the lean-to, refusing to settle until Hannah stepped out and spoke to him. "He's alive." The horse watched her, for now. She rubbed his wet forehead once before returning inside. 3 nights passed that way. Firewood, willow bark tea, cold cloths. Short stretches of sleep in the chair, with Hannah's rifle against the wall within reach. She learned the bay's name from a brass plate on his halter. Bishop. She still did not know the man's. Just before dawn on the 3rd morning, the fever finally broke. Hannah had fallen asleep in the chair. When she woke, the cabin was quiet. The stranger was watching her. She straightened. "You're awake." His gaze traveled slowly across the room. "Where am I?" "Whitcomb land." Something changed in his face. Small, but Hannah saw it. "You fell near my east fence," she continued. "Your horse stayed with you." He tried to rise. Pain drove him back against the cot. "Don't." "My horse?" Hannah almost smiled. Of everything he could have asked. "In the lean-to, fed and watered. He's been considerably less trouble than you." Relief crossed his face. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." Hannah poured coffee into a tin cup, then changed her mind and gave him water instead. "You haven't told me your name." The man looked at her. For a moment, Hannah wondered whether he would lie. He didn't. Eli Maddox. The stove popped. Nothing else moved. Hannah set the cup down very carefully. Levi Maddox's son? Yes. The answer came without pride or apology. Hannah stood. Eli watched her, but his good hand remained on top of the blanket. You know who I am, she said. Hannah Whitcomb. How? I grew up knowing where Whitcomb land began. Then you know you shouldn't be here. I didn't intend to be. He glanced toward the window. I was looking for the old Willow Creek crossing. Bishop spooked after the storm. Ground gave way beneath him. That crossing washed out 10 years ago. I haven't lived here since I was 13. Hannah looked at him more carefully. Where? Cheyenne. My aunt took me there. Why? His gaze dropped. My sister died. Hannah already knew the name before she asked. Ruth? Eli looked up. She was 9. Hannah's fingers tightened around the back of the chair. When? Eli was silent for one long breath. Then he said, The night your mother died. The room seemed suddenly smaller. Hannah heard the creak outside. The stove. Bishop shifting beneath the lean-to. For 17 years, she had understood the fire as one tragedy. Rose Whitcomb dead. Clay Whitcomb broken. Levi Maddox blamed. Now another child stood inside the same night. Ruth Maddox, 9 years old. Dead. Hannah sat slowly. Why did you come back? My father is failing. There was no tenderness in the words, but there was pain. The ranch is going with him if somebody doesn't take hold of it. I came home this summer to do that. And the crossing? Eli hesitated. That was something else. Hannah waited. He looked toward the cabin door, toward Bishop and the saddle bearing the mark Hannah had been taught to fear. I found papers in my father's desk. Old ones. A map showing Willow Creek before the crossings changed. What kind of papers? Letters. Pieces of a ledger. Things he should have thrown away if he truly wanted them forgotten. Hannah felt a chill that had nothing to do with September. What things? A child's ribbon. Eli swallowed. References to Ruth. The spring. Your family. Hannah's eyes narrowed. My father? No. Eli looked directly at her. Your mother. Hannah did not move. Eli's voice lowered. Rose Whitcomb knew my family before she died. Outside, morning sunlight finally broke beneath the retreating storm. A narrow band of gold crossed the wet grass and reached the lean-to. It touched Bishop's saddle. The hawk, the broken star. For 17 years, Hannah had been taught to see that mark as an answer. Standing in the doorway of the line cabin, with a wounded Maddox behind her and the name of her dead mother hanging between them, Hannah saw something different. A question, and for the first time in 17 years, she wanted to know who had been afraid of the answer. By the end of the week, Eli Maddox could walk from the cot to the cabin door without leaning against the wall. That was the good news. The bad news was that he had apparently decided walking meant working. Hannah found him outside Saturday morning with his left hand wrapped around a leaning fence post and his injured right arm bound against his ribs. His face had gone pale from the effort. She stopped 10 feet away. You planning to heal that shoulder by tearing it off? Eli turned. I was looking. You look with your eyes. I was. Then why are both boots in the mud? His mouth twitched. Hannah set down the basket she carried. Biscuits wrapped in a flour cloth, beans in a covered crock, fresh coffee, and a small tin of pine and comfrey salve. Eli let go of the post. Yes, ma'am. Don't yes, ma'am me when you intend to do the same foolish thing tomorrow. I might wait until Monday. That nearly got a laugh from her. Nearly. Sit down. He sat on the cabin step. Hannah opened the salve and loosened the binding around his shoulder. The bruising had begun to fade from purple to yellow along the edges, but the joint remained swollen. Eli looked away while she worked. Not out of embarrassment. Courtesy. That mattered more than Hannah wanted it to. She rubbed the salve carefully around the injury. His jaw tightened once. You can say when it hurts. I reckon you'd notice. I noticed. Their eyes met. Hannah looked back at the bandage. She had established rules after learning his name. Eli stayed at the line cabin. He did not approach the Whitcomb house. He kept away from the west pasture and Clay's horses. The moment he could safely ride Bishop, he would return south. Eli had accepted every condition. No argument, no wounded pride, no attempt to make her feel cruel for giving shelter with boundaries attached. That unsettled Hannah almost as much as the Maddox brand had. She had expected something in him to justify 17 years of suspicion. Instead, he swept the cabin floor, folded his blankets, carried his own water as soon as Hannah allowed it, and thanked her for meals as though kindness were something freely given, not something he had earned by suffering. There, Hannah said, tying the fresh cloth. Eli flexed his fingers. Better. That means don't use it. I understand. You understood yesterday. Yesterday I only tried to bring in kindling. You dropped the axe. It slipped. It surrendered. A rough laugh escaped him. Hannah looked up before she could stop herself. It changed his face. For the first time, she saw someone other than the wounded stranger from Willow Creek. Someone who might once have laughed easily. The thought stayed with her longer than it should have. Eli glanced past her toward the north pasture. What happened to those trees? Hannah followed his gaze. The old orchard. It lay beyond a low stone wall half swallowed by weeds, branches twisted against the September sky. Several trees were dead. Others leaned beneath years of neglect. My mother planted the first row. Rows? Hannah nodded. She brought starts west in a wagon. Papa said half of them shouldn't have survived the first winter. But they did. Most. Eli studied the orchard. You ever think about bringing it back? Hannah closed the salve tin. Once. Only once? She gave him a look. Eli waited. Hannah should have left it there. Instead, she said, I wanted to sell from it. Apples? Apples. Dried slices. Vinegar. Preserves. Apple butter if the crop was worth the sugar. Eli nodded as though she had just described a perfectly ordinary plan. Briar Gulch could buy some. Freight wagons could carry the rest east. I know. You figured costs? Years ago. How many trees? 38 still living the last time I counted. Eli looked at her. You didn't stop wanting it. Hannah's fingers went still on the tin. You stopped believing there'd be room for it. The words landed too close. Her father had never forbidden the orchard. That would have been easier. Clay simply stopped going there after Rose died. Every spring, Hannah told herself she would prune the trees after calving. Every summer after haying. Every autumn after the winter stores were put up. Later. Later had lasted 17 years. Hannah stood. Your shoulder needs another week. Eli understood the retreat and let her have it. When she picked up the basket, he said, I know a little about grafting. She turned. Worked an orchard outside Cheyenne one winter when horse work got thin. I didn't ask for help, no. Then don't offer. All right. She took 2 steps. Though once I have 2 useful arms, I could stand nearby and offer opinions. Hannah looked back. That may be worse. His smile followed her halfway across the pasture. 2 days later, she found the axe in the dirt. Eli stood beside it, looking offended. Hannah stared at the axe, then at him. I didn't swing it. What happened? I attempted to move it. With one hand. That was the available number. Hannah laughed. She couldn't stop it this time. The sound surprised her enough that she turned away. When she looked back, Eli wasn't laughing. He was watching her. Not boldly, not hungrily, just quietly, as though he had discovered something he wanted to remember. The warmth in Hannah's face had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. She carried the stew inside. Eli followed more slowly. The cabin smelled of pine smoke and coffee. Hannah set the pot on the stove while Eli stood by the table. Then his expression changed. I should show you something. Hannah turned. He reached into his coat with his left hand and took out a faded blue cloth. I brought this from my father's house. He laid it on the table. Hannah did not touch it. Eli unfolded the cloth. Inside lay a child's ribbon. Yellow once, though age had browned the edges. Beside it was half of a hand-carved wooden horse. 2 legs were missing. One side had been blackened by heat. Hannah's breath slowed. Ruth's? The ribbon, I think. And the horse? I don't know. Eli reached into his coat again. This was with them. A torn ledger page. The ink had faded, but the writing remained readable. Hannah leaned over the table. Rose came again today. Brought honey cakes for Ruth. Said no child should suffer because 2 proud men cannot share water. Hannah read it twice, then once more. Rose. My father's writing, Eli said. Hannah picked up the ribbon. Her mother had crossed Willow Creek. Not once. Again. She tried to picture Rose walking onto Maddox land carrying honey cakes for a sick 9-year-old girl. Clay had never told her. Why were you near our fence? Hannah asked. Eli understood the question beneath it. I found an old creek map in the same drawer. I was trying to locate the crossing marked on it. So your coming here wasn't an accident. My falling off Bishop was. His mouth tightened. The search wasn't. Hannah looked at him. You knew there might be something on Whitcomb land. I knew there might be something near the old boundary. That's all. You should have told me. Yes. The simple admission took some of the anger from her, not all. You let me care for you 3 nights without telling me. I was unconscious for most of 2. That leaves 1. Yes. Hannah folded the ledger fragment. Eli did not defend himself. I was afraid you'd send me away before I could explain. Maybe I should. Maybe. She hated how calmly he gave her the right to choose. Outside, Bishop suddenly raised his head. Hoofbeats sounded along the road. Hannah crossed to the door. A gray horse came around the cottonwoods. Nolan Briggs, her father's nearest neighbor, and the fastest mouth between Willow Creek and Briar Gulch. Inside, Hannah said. Eli frowned. You hiding me? I'm preventing conversation. That sounds similar. Inside, Eli. He obeyed. Hannah stepped toward the fence as Nolan reined in. Morning, Hannah. Morning. His eyes traveled immediately to the smoking chimney. Then Bishop. Then the tracks around the cabin. Didn't know you had company. Wounded traveler. Traveler got a name? Most do. Nolan smiled. It wasn't his usual smile. Your father back? No. Shame. Man likes knowing who crosses his land. A woman manages fine knowing it herself. His eyes sharpened. Then Bishop moved. The saddle blanket slipped. Leather showed beneath it. The hawk, the broken star. Nolan stopped smiling. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he touched 2 fingers to his hat. "You be careful, Hannah." He turned the gray and rode away. Eli came outside after the hoofbeats faded. He saw. "Yes, I can leave tonight." Hannah looked at his shoulder. "You can barely put on your coat." "That's my concern." "No. Finding you dead beside another fence would make it mine again." Hannah. It was the first time he had spoken her name that way. Not Miss Whitcomb. Hannah. She looked at him. "If people come asking," Eli said, "don't put yourself between them and my name." She thought of Rose's handwriting. Honey cakes, a yellow ribbon, 2 proud men. "If people have questions," Hannah said, "maybe it's time somebody answered them." By Sunday evening, Briar Gulch knew. By Monday morning, the story had grown teeth. Mrs. Adler heard Hannah had found an armed Maddox hiding near the creek. At the blacksmith shop, someone claimed Eli had been riding Whitcomb fences after dark. By noon, the rumor said the Maddox family meant to reopen the spring dispute. Nolan returned that afternoon. This time he brought Wade Pritcher. Wade had worked winter cattle for Clay years earlier, and still behaved as though that gave him a vote in Whitcomb affairs. Hannah met them outside the line cabin. Eli stood in the doorway behind her. Nolan rested his hands on his saddle horn. "Your father would want him gone." "My father isn't here. That's exactly the trouble." Wade looked toward Eli. "He looks fit enough to ride. Then you should get your eyes examined." Nolan's expression hardened. "That name ruined your house once, Hannah." She went still. "You aiming to let it in twice?" For one terrible second, she saw the blackened lamp beneath Rose's portrait. Clay alone at the supper table. Her mother's grave after winter snow. Then Hannah felt the folded ribbon inside her coat pocket. Rose had crossed this boundary before her. Not because she had forgotten her family, because a child needed kindness. Hannah raised her eyes. "You don't know what ruined my house." Nolan stared at her. The words frightened Hannah almost as much as they angered him, because neither did she. "Not anymore." "My father can hear about Eli from me," she said. Nolan turned his horse. "You'd better hope he comes home in a forgiving mood." Wade followed him down the road. Dust hung behind them. Eli waited until they were gone. "I should leave." "No. You don't owe me this. This isn't about owing you." Hannah turned toward him. "Can you sit Bishop by Friday?" Eli studied her face. "If I have to." "Don't have to. Heal enough." "Why Friday?" Hannah took Ruth's yellow ribbon from her pocket and folded it carefully inside the blue cloth. "Because we're going to Briar Gulch." Eli said nothing. "If this valley wants to live by that fire," Hannah continued, "we're going to find out what actually burned." Friday came under a hard white sky. Hannah was awake before daylight. She dressed quietly, pinned her hair back, and went downstairs without lighting the parlor lamp. Rose's portrait was barely visible above the mantel. Beneath it sat the little brass lamp, one side blackened by the fire 17 years earlier. Hannah stopped. All her life that lamp had meant one thing. Maddox. Now Ruth's yellow ribbon rested inside Hannah's coat pocket. She left the house without touching the lamp. At the line cabin, Bishop was already saddled. Eli stood beside him with his right arm bound close beneath his coat. "You did that yourself?" "Mostly." Mostly means badly. It means Bishop objected to part of the process. Hannah checked the cinch herself. Eli let her. When she finished, she noticed her salve tin on the fence post. Cleaned, refilled, a strip of brown string held a folded scrap of paper around it. For what I used and what I couldn't repay. Hannah looked at him. You didn't owe me for medicine. I know. Then why? Eli adjusted Bishop's rein with his left hand. It was easier than saying thank you again. Hannah tucked the tin into her saddlebag. Neither mentioned it after that. They reached Briar Gulch near noon. Friday market wagons crowded the main street. Chickens scratched beneath a produce cart. Horses stood 3 deep at the hitching rail outside Mrs. Adler's general store. Conversation died as Hannah and Eli rode through. The blacksmith's hammer stopped. Mrs. Adler froze with a flour sack in her arms. Outside the saloon, Nolan Briggs leaned against a porch post. He had been waiting. Well, Nolan called. Whitcomb brought the Maddox into town herself. Eli started to dismount. Hannah was already on the ground. Nolan crossed the street. Your father would be ashamed. That hurt. More than Hannah expected. For a moment she was 7 again, watching Clay kneel beside Rose's grave. Then she remembered another thing Clay had taught her. Check your work before trusting it. My father taught me to check a fence before calling it sound, Hannah said. A story deserves the same. Nolan's smile disappeared. Hannah turned away. Eli followed her into the records office. Mr. Penwell sat behind a scarred walnut desk with wire spectacles low on his nose. He looked from Hannah to Eli, then through the window at the gathering crowd. I suppose you aren't here for a marriage license. Hannah blinked. Beside her, Eli coughed into his fist. No. Good. I'd hate to disappoint half the street before lunch. Despite herself, Hannah felt warmth climb into her face. We need records from the year of the Whitcomb barn fire. Penwell's humor vanished. That's a long time buried. Then we'll dig carefully. The old clerk studied Hannah. I remember Rose. Hannah's throat tightened. Your mother bought peppermint sticks here for children who weren't hers. Used to tell me sweetness shouldn't depend on whose pocket had the penny. It was such a small memory. That made it worse. Clay had preserved Rose as the woman who died. Penwell remembered a woman buying candy. Please, Hannah said. Penwell disappeared into the back room. He returned with 2 ledgers and a packet tied with faded string. For the next hour, Hannah and Eli read. Water complaints, fence notices, grazing disputes. Clay Whitcomb accusing Levi Maddox of diverting spring water. Levi answering that Whitcomb cattle had crossed his boundary. Month after month of stubborn men putting anger into ink. Then Hannah saw handwriting she knew. Rounded letters. Firm downward strokes. Rose. She had seen that hand in the recipe book at home. Hannah read aloud. Mr. Maddox has agreed in private that shared access may be arranged after harvest. My husband does not yet trust this promise, and Levi fears appearing weak before his men. I ask that no charge be pressed while I continue trying to bring both sides to a peaceful agreement. Eli leaned closer. My father agreed to share it. Hannah stared at the paper. The spring hadn't still been the problem. Pride was. Penwell shifted uneasily. There's something else. He brought a thin envelope from beneath the ledger. Your father showed this during the death inquiry. Later asked for it back. The judge required a copy. Hannah unfolded the page. The signature at the bottom stopped her. Nolan Briggs. I saw Levi Maddox near the Whitcomb barn shortly before the fire. His horse was tied outside. I heard voices raised. By the time I returned with help, the barn was burning. Hannah looked through the window. Rain had begun spotting the glass. Across the street, Nolan was watching. She stood. Eli rose beside her. Hannah, I'm asking him. I know. Outside, the first thunder rolled over town. Hannah crossed the street with Nolan's statement in her hand. People moved beneath awnings as the rain strengthened. Nolan stayed where he was. Find what you wanted? I found your words. Hannah held up the statement. Why have you spent 17 years telling only the part that pointed toward Levi? Nolan's eyes narrowed. Old matters. My mother isn't an old matter to me. You're letting a Maddox twist your head. No. Your signature did that. Eli remained several steps behind Hannah. Close enough. Not taking the moment from her, Nolan glanced at him. Not every bone wants daylight. Eli's voice was quiet. That sounds less like advice than a warning. Hoofbeats suddenly hammered through the rain. Fast. Every head turned. A chestnut mare came down the eastern road, foam white at the bit. Hannah knew the rider before she saw his face. Papa! Clay Whitcomb pulled the mare up hard. He was soaked through. His gaze found Hannah, then Eli, then the Maddox saddle at the rail. Clay dismounted. I heard in Rawlins my daughter had taken a Maddox onto Whitcomb land. Hannah stepped toward him. He was wounded. And you brought him in? I kept him alive. Clay's face tightened. After what that family did to us? Hannah took Rose's letter from her coat. I don't know what they did anymore. Clay stared at her. She placed the letter and Nolan's statement in his hands. Mama knew Ruth Maddox. She went to their ranch. She was trying to settle the spring dispute. Clay read. Rain ran from the brim of his hat. His face changed slowly. Then he looked at Nolan. What else did you never tell me? Nolan stepped down from the porch. Clay, take Hannah home. Clay didn't move. Answer me. I told you what I saw. You told me Levi was there. He was. Hannah stepped beside her father. Was Ruth there? Nolan's eyes flickered. Eli saw it. Was my sister there? He asked. Nolan looked at him. Yes. Eli went still. Alone? Rain rattled against the roofs. No. Hannah's stomach tightened. Who was with her? Nolan looked down. Rose. Clay closed his eyes. When he opened them, something in him had changed. What were they doing? Talking. Who was Rose angry with? Nolan said nothing. Clay took one step closer. Nolan. Me. The street fell silent. Nolan's words began coming faster. He had confronted Rose about visiting the Maddox place, accused her of making fools of the Whitcomb side by carrying food to Ruth and trying to settle the water dispute. She told me men like me kept wounds open because we liked feeling righteous. Hannah could almost hear her mother's voice saying it. Then Nolan said too quickly, I didn't start that fire. Nobody had accused him. Eli's eyes lifted. Penwell had come outside. The old clerk stood beneath the rain without his coat. Nolan. Nolan turned. Penwell looked tired. I saw you behind the livery afterward. Your sleeve was burned. Clay looked at him. You knew? I knew something was wrong. I was afraid. Nolan pointed at him. That proves nothing. No, Penwell said, but it belongs with the rest. Hannah's voice shook. What happened when Mama told you to leave? Nolan stared at her. For the first time, she saw fear instead of arrogance. I walked away. Past the barn? Yes. What happened? His mouth opened, closed. Thunder rolled over Briar Gulch. Then Nolan whispered, I kicked the lantern. Nothing happened for several seconds. No shout, no fist, only rain. Clay seemed to sway. Nolan kept talking. It hung on the fence post. I was angry. I kicked the post when I turned away. The lantern fell. Hannah could barely hear herself. And the fire? I thought the flame went out in the mud. His face crumpled. It didn't. Clay's hand closed around Rose's letter. My wife died because you were angry she corrected you. I went for help, Clay. I swear I did. You let him blame my father, Eli said. Nolan looked at him. I said Levi was there, and let everyone decide the rest. Nolan had no answer. Sheriff Amos Bell came through the crowd. Nolan. Nolan looked around. There was nowhere left to go. Sheriff Bell took his arm and led him toward the jail. No one cheered. Mrs. Adler stood beneath her awning with tears on her face. Wade Pritchard slipped toward his horse without looking at Hannah. Clay remained in the middle of the street. Hannah approached him. Papa. He lifted one hand. Not to send her away. Only for a moment. A moment to stand inside 17 ruined years. At last he looked toward the jail. I ought to hate him. Hannah said nothing. Clay's voice cracked. But I'm tired of what hate has made of me. The rain began to ease. Mrs. Adler crossed the street and placed a wrapped loaf of bread in Hannah's hands. No words, just bread. People slowly returned to their wagons. The great explosion of truth ended not with celebration, but with wet streets and people unable to meet one another's eyes. Hannah turned toward Eli. He wasn't watching Nolan. He was looking south, toward Maddox country. There's more, he said. Clay looked at him. What? Nolan started the fire. Eli swallowed. But my father was inside that barn. Clay's face hardened again. How do you know? Eli looked at Hannah. The ribbon I showed her. Then back at Clay. My father had it when he came out. The remaining color left Clay's face. If you want the whole truth, Eli said, we still have to ask Levi why he let you blame him. For 17 years, Clay Whitcomb had refused the southern road. Now he walked to his mare and put one boot into the stirrup. Hannah stared at him. Papa? Clay mounted, his eyes fixed beyond the rain, toward the land marked by a black hawk over a broken star. Take me to him. They left Briar Gulch before sunset. The storm had moved east, leaving water in the wagon ruts and a clean smell rising from the sage. Hannah rode between her father and Eli. Nobody spoke for the first several miles. Eli's shoulder had paid dearly for the day. He held his right arm close, and Bishop had shortened his gait, as though the horse understood. Hannah slowed Juniper. Clay noticed. His eyes moved from his daughter to Eli. Once that look would have carried a warning. This time he said nothing. At the fork, Clay stopped. North led home. South led to Maddox land. For 17 years, Clay Whitcomb had taken the northern road. He looked south now, then turned his mare. The Maddox Ranch lay in a shallow valley where Willow Creek widened through good grass. The house was smaller than Hannah expected. Weathered boards, a patched barn roof, a windmill turning slowly behind the corrals. The black hawk over the broken star marked the gate. Clay stiffened when he saw it. An old man stood on the porch. Levi Maddox was nothing like the figure Hannah had built from 17 years of silence. He was thin, white-haired. One hand rested on a cane. His shoulders bent beneath a wool coat that looked too large for him. When he saw Eli, worry crossed his face. When he saw Clay, the worry became something older. Eli dismounted carefully. We know about Nolan. Levi closed his eyes. Not surprise. Recognition. Eli walked toward the porch. Tell it. Levi looked at his son. I should have told you years ago, yes. One word. No anger. Somehow it hurt more. Levi lowered himself into the porch chair. Clay remained standing. Did you know Nolan started it? Not that night. But later, pieces. Enough pieces. Clay's jaw tightened. Then start at the beginning. Levi looked toward Willow Creek. Rose sent me word. Clay's face changed at his wife's name. She wanted the spring matter settled before winter. I had agreed to shared access after harvest. She asked me to meet near your east barn with the signed terms. You met my wife behind my back. She meant to bring the agreement to you. Clay looked away. Levi continued. Ruth followed me. Eli's head lifted. I didn't know until I found her near the fence. She knew Rose would be there. Why? Hannah asked. Levi looked at her. Because Rose had been visiting her all summer. His voice softened. Ruth had a fever that kept her inside near 6 weeks. Your mother brought honey cakes, stories. Once she brought a little wooden horse. Hannah stopped breathing. Her hand went to her coat pocket. The horse? Levi nodded. Rose said her Hannah had outgrown it. A memory came loose. Hannah at 7, searching beneath her bed, asking where her wooden horse had gone. Rose kneeling beside her. Some toys get called away to children who need them more. Hannah had forgotten. Until now. Tears blurred the Maddox yard. My mother gave Ruth my horse. She did. Clay covered his mouth. Levi stared at the boards beneath his boots. Nolan was there when I arrived, arguing with Rose. Ruth was crying. Nolan left angry. And then? Clay asked. The lantern fell. Levi's fingers tightened around his cane. Grass caught. Horses started kicking inside the barn. Ruth ran toward the door. Eli whispered, Why? The horse. Levi looked at him. She dropped the wooden horse near the barn and went back for it. Eli closed his eyes. Rose followed her. I followed Rose. The yard seemed to grow terribly quiet. I got 2 horses loose. Smoke filled the rafters. Somewhere inside, I struck a hanging lamp with my shoulder. Levi swallowed. It fell. Clay stared at him. A second lamp? Yes. The fire spread faster after that? Yes. Levi's voice nearly failed. A timber came down, knocked me toward the door. I crawled outside. His hand opened. I had Ruth's ribbon in my fist. Nothing else. Hannah looked down. The yellow ribbon was inside her pocket. 17 years reduced to something that could fit in one hand. Clay's voice came rough. You let me believe you caused all of it. Levi raised his eyes. Yes. You let me hate you. Yes. You let Hannah grow up inside that hate. Levi looked at her. Shame hollowed his face. Yes. Eli stepped closer. And me? Levi flinched. You let me grow up thinking Ruth's death was a locked door. I thought silence would spare you. Eli's expression did not change. It spared you from telling me. Levi lowered his head. I know that now. Nobody hurried to forgive him. Hannah was glad. Some wounds deserved quiet before anyone tried putting clean words over them. She took out the blue cloth. Yellow ribbon. Broken wooden horse. She held them where all 4 could see. These shouldn't belong to only one family anymore. Clay looked at the little horse that had once belonged to his daughter. Levi looked at the ribbon that had belonged to his. No one argued. When they finally turned north, Eli nearly stumbled mounting Bishop. Clay saw it. "You're not riding south again tonight." Eli looked at him. "Sir? There's a spare room at my house." Hannah stared at her father. Clay kept his eyes on his reins. "Don't mistake it for peace, Maddox." "I won't. Rose carried food to your father's house for a sick child." Clay swallowed. "If I can't give a wounded man a bed after learning that, then I've loved her memory poorly." Eli removed his hat. "Thank you." Clay grunted. "Save your strength." That night, the Whitcomb house held a Maddox for the first time anyone could remember. Hannah changed Eli's bandage in the spare room. Clay spent 10 unnecessary minutes in the hallway checking a perfectly good door latch. Hannah knew what he was doing. Eli did too. Neither embarrassed him by saying it. "You need rest," Hannah said. "So I've been told. You've also been told not to work fence." "I remember. Or split kindling." "I remember that more clearly." She tied the bandage. Eli watched her hands. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not letting the first story be the only one." Hannah went still. "I almost did. But you didn't." Their eyes met. For a moment, the room became too quiet. Hannah stepped back. "Sleep." "Yes, ma'am." She reached the doorway. "Hannah?" She turned. Eli said nothing more. He only looked at her. It was enough. Later, Hannah found Clay in the parlor. He stood before Rose's portrait. The blackened lamp was in his hands. For 17 years it had occupied the same place beneath her picture. Clay turned it over. "I was wrong." Hannah stayed by the doorway. Clay looked at Rose. "Not about losing you." His thumb moved over the burned brass. "About where I put the blame." He opened the writing desk, then placed the lamp inside. He didn't throw it away. He didn't hide it in the attic. He simply removed it from the place where blame had been worshipped. The drawer closed softly. Clay remained there. She was not only the fire. Hannah's eyes filled. No. The next morning, Clay made coffee before Hannah came downstairs. He stood at the stove in his shirt sleeves. "Your mother sang when she brushed your hair," he said. Hannah stopped halfway into the kitchen. "What?" "Badly." A surprised laugh escaped her. Clay kept his back turned, burned biscuits whenever she hurried them, cried over lame horses, once told Reverend Pike his sermons were too long for July. Hannah laughed again, but tears came with it. Clay finally faced her. "I should have told you those things." Hannah said nothing. "I gave you the way she died, and called that remembering her." His voice broke. "She was not only the fire, Hannah." Hannah crossed the kitchen. She put her arms around him. For 1 second, Clay stood stiff. Then he held his daughter as if 17 years had finally become too heavy to carry alone. Later that morning, Hannah went to the north orchard. Dew soaked the hem of her skirt. Dead branches reached between trees that still held stubborn leaves. She found Eli there. His coat was buttoned wrong. "You're supposed to be resting. I saw the orchard from the window. That doesn't explain why you're standing in it." He looked around. "Some of these can be saved." "Some. My father's got 2 hands who know grafting." Hannah glanced at him. "You're making plans for my trees again." "No." Eli looked toward the mountains. "I'm trying not to say something harder." Her heart gave one slow beat. "What?" He took his time. "When I leave here, I don't know how to go back to being only the man from the other side of the creek." Hannah looked down. The words she had feared were finally between them. You were hurt when we met. I know. I cared for you. I know that too. And my father spent 17 years hating your name. Eli waited. What if this is only gratitude? She asked. Or me trying to prove Papa wrong? What if we take everything that happened and call it something it isn't? Eli did not reach for her, that mattered. He stood close enough to touch her and chose not to. Then we don't decide now. Hannah looked up. My shoulder will heal. I'll go home. You won't owe me care, and I won't owe you being saved. His voice softened. After that, if I still want to cross the creek and you still want to see me coming, we'll know more. Hannah's eyes burned. That sounds inconvenient. Most honest things are. She smiled. Small. Real. Clay's voice carried from the orchard gate. Hannah. They turned. He stood with one hand resting on the weathered rail. I'm going to the spring tomorrow. Eli straightened. With my father? If he'll come. He will. Hannah walked toward Clay. What are you going to say? Her father looked south through Rose's neglected trees, toward the creek that had divided two families longer than Hannah had been old enough to understand why. I don't know, Ma'am. He rested his hand on the gate. Maybe for once I ought to listen first. The spring had never stopped running. It came out beneath a shelf of gray stone, clear and cold, then divided through the grass toward both ranches, as if 17 years of argument had meant nothing to water. Hannah reached it just after sunrise. Frost silvered the weeds. Mist hung low above Willow Creek. She dismounted Juniper and stood listening to water move over stones. In her coat pocket rested the blue cloth, Ruth's ribbon, the broken wooden horse. Clay arrived from the north. Eli and Levi came from the south. Nobody shook hands. That seemed right. Clay took a folded paper from his coat. Penwell's correcting the record. Sheriff Bell says Nolan will go before the county judge. Levi nodded. Clay looked at Eli. I hated you before I knew you. Hannah watched her father struggle with the next words. That was wrong. Eli removed his hat. Thank you, sir. Levi stared at the spring. My boy grew up with a dead sister and a father made of shut doors. Clay's face tightened. My daughter grew up with a dead mother and half a father. Hannah did not rescue him from the truth. Neither did Eli rescue Levi. For once, the fathers carried what belonged to them. Hannah took out the blue cloth. I've been thinking about these. She opened it. 2 trees. Clay looked at her. What? From Mama's orchard. One here on the north side. One on the south. For Rose and Ruth, Eli said. Hannah nodded. They'll need watering, pruning, wrapping before hard freezes. Levi looked from the spring to Clay. Clay understood. Peace would not be a handshake. It would be work. Apple trees? He asked. Apple trees. A little later, Clay and Eli rode north and returned with 2 young starts from the edge of the winesap row, their roots wrapped in wet burlap. They dug the holes several yards apart. Eli tried working one-handed until Clay took the shovel from him. You planning to ruin that shoulder after my daughter spent half September fixing it? Eli stepped back. No, sir. Good. Hannah hid her smile. They planted Rose's tree north of the water, Ruth's south. Before they covered the roots, Hannah knelt with the ribbon. Clay held the wooden horse. For a long time, he simply looked at it. That was yours once. I know. Your mother gave it away. To somebody who needed it. Clay pressed the little horse into the earth beneath Ruth's tree. Then I reckon that's where it belongs. Hannah placed the ribbon beside it. Levi's fingers shook as he touched the soil. Eli rested his good hand against his father's back. Across the spring, Hannah put her hand on Clay's shoulder. Nothing was fixed, but nobody was hiding. That was enough for one morning. Eli's shoulder healed before the first real snow, and when it did, he left. There was no quarrel, no misunderstanding. One cold morning, Bishop stood saddled outside the Whitcomb house, and Eli carried his bedroll beneath his good arm. Hannah came onto the porch. So, you can work again. Doctor in Briar Gulch says carefully. You heard the carefully part? I heard most of it. She almost smiled. Eli looked toward the southern road. My father needs me. I know, and I need to know something. Hannah waited. I need to know whether I cross this creek again because I choose to. His eyes met hers, and whether you're glad when I do. Hannah's throat tightened. Then I suppose you'd better go. Eli nodded. He mounted Bishop. Clay stood by the barn pretending to inspect a hinge. Eli touched his hat to him. Mr. Whitcomb. Maddox. Then Eli rode south. Hannah watched until Bishop disappeared beyond the cottonwoods. The house seemed too quiet afterward. 4 days passed. Then Tuesday came. Near 10 in the morning, Hannah heard hoofbeats. She was in the orchard carrying pruning shears. Bishop appeared beyond the stone wall. Eli rode through the gate with grafting tools tied behind his saddle. Hannah folded her arms. Forget something? Yes. What? 38 neglected apple trees. Her smile escaped before she could stop it. That became their rhythm. Tuesday after Tuesday. Sometimes Eli rode north. Sometimes Hannah rode south. By December, snow covered the valley. The spring still ran between white banks, and the 2 young trees stood bare beside it. At Rose's orchard, Eli brought 2 Maddox hands who knew grafting. Clay criticized their first 3 cuts. By the 4th day, he admitted they knew what they were doing. Hannah nearly dropped her ledger. She began keeping orchard accounts in Rose's old recipe book. Under the apple butter recipe came numbers for barrels, jars, vinegar crocks, and freight costs. Not someday. Next harvest, Eli carved markers for the rose. Winesap, pippin, winter pearmain. The last marker read Rose's Row. Hannah ran her fingers over the letters. You can change it, Eli said. No. She looked at him. It's right. Their courtship was made of small things. A gate repaired before Hannah remembered asking. Coffee kept strongest on Tuesdays. Lunch against the orchard wall while snow fell quietly. 2 gloved hands reaching for the same pruning shears. Neither hurried. Neither needed rescuing anymore. By March, the valley began to thaw. One Tuesday, Eli asked Hannah to ride West Ridge. Below them lay both ranches, Whitcomb to the north, Maddox to the south. Between them, the spring flashed silver. Eli dismounted beneath a stand of aspens. Hannah followed. He looked nervous. That pleased her more than it should have. I don't want to ask you because you saved me. Hannah said nothing. I don't want to ask because our fathers finally learned to speak. And I don't want Briar Gulch turning us into a pretty ending for an ugly story. Then don't. He looked at her. I want to ask because every Tuesday since September, I've remembered waking in that cabin and hearing you tell me Bishop was safe. Hannah's eyes stung. I want to ask because you look at crooked fences and sick trees and wounded men, and somehow still know neglected isn't the same as worthless. Eli reached into his coat. A plain silver ring rested in his palm. At its center was a small pale stone polished smooth. Hannah recognized it. From the spring? From the spring. He took one breath. When I imagine home now, it isn't one side of the creek or the other. His voice softened. It's wherever you're standing. Hannah looked toward the valley because looking at him had become difficult. You practiced that. I did. It shows. Eli laughed. Then his voice shook anyway. Hannah Whitcomb, will you marry me? She let him wait. Just long enough. Yes. Eli closed his eyes for half a second. Hannah smiled. Because Tuesdays became my favorite too. When they told Clay he stood silent so long, Eli looked prepared to face judgment. Finally, Clay said, "The orchard still needs pruning." Hannah stared. "Papa." Clay looked at Eli. "A man joining this family ought to know the work." Eli understood. "Yes, sir." Later, when Hannah found Clay alone in the barn, he touched her cheek. "Your mother would have liked him." That was when Hannah cried. They married in late spring beside the spring. Neither ranch, both families. Mrs. Adler brought 3 pies. Mr. Penwell gave Hannah a new ledger for the orchard business. Sheriff Amos Bell stood near the back with his hat against his chest. Levi stood beside Eli, thinner now but smiling. Clay walked Hannah toward the water. Rose's old wedding ribbon was tied inside his hat, where only Hannah knew it rested. At Eli's side, Clay took Hannah's hand. For a moment he held it, then placed it into Eli's. "Take care of what she trusts you with." "I will." The vows were simple. When they finished, wind passed through the cottonwoods. Rose's tree moved. Ruth's tree moved with it, new leaves trembling above the water. Years later, travelers stopping along Willow Creek found 2 great apple trees beside the spring. One bore deep red fruit, the other small golden apples bright as Ruth's ribbon had once been. Their branches met above the water. Old residents called them Rose and Ruth. Travelers called them the peace trees. They told stories about the black ranch woman who found blood on her fence after a September storm, about the wounded cowboy beneath the Maddox brand, about how he opened dark green eyes and whispered, "Don't be afraid of me." But Hannah knew the truer story. 17 years before Hannah found Eli, Rose Whitcomb had crossed the same boundary for a sick little girl. Rose had given kindness before asking what an old quarrel required. Without knowing it, Hannah had done the same. She had not betrayed her mother by loving Eli Maddox. She had finally understood her. One autumn evening, Hannah and Eli stood beneath the joined branches while Bishop and Juniper drank downstream. Behind them lay 2 ranches. Beyond the hill stood the orchard Hannah once believed she would never restore, heavy now with fruit waiting for harvest. Eli reached for her hand. Hannah gave it freely. The spring ran beneath Rose and Ruth without asking who owned the water. The past had not disappeared. It had simply stopped holding the reins. And what began with blood on a fence became something fear could never have built. A home where the truth was spoken, where grief was remembered without being worshipped, where nobody stayed because they were wounded, indebted, or needed. Hannah and Eli stayed because, after every other reason was gone, they still chose each other. And maybe that is the part worth carrying with us. Imagine being Hannah for a moment. Imagine finding someone at your fence bearing the very name you had been taught to fear. Would you have helped him? Would you have searched for the truth when that truth might break open everything your family had believed for years? Or imagine being Eli, knowing the road home meant facing grief your own father had buried behind silence. Sometimes the hardest boundary to cross isn't a creek, a fence, or a ranch line. It's the distance between what we've always believed and what we're finally brave enough to see. Rose crossed that distance for Ruth. Hannah crossed it for Eli. And in the end, two families learned that healing didn't require forgetting the people they had lost. It required remembering them without letting sorrow decide whom they were allowed to love. Maybe there's a fence like that somewhere in your own life. If this story brought someone to mind, tell me in the comments what you believe Hannah's greatest act of courage really was. And if you'd like to stay a while, you're welcome to subscribe. There are more frontier stories ahead. Stories of wounded hearts, buried truths, second chances, and the quiet kind of love that finds its way home.